Now when Ebalemek, the Ethiopian, one of the eunuchs, which was in the king's house, heard that they had put Jeremiah in the dungeon, the king then sitting in the gate of Benjamin, Ebed-melech went forth out of the king's house, and spake to the king, saying, My lord the king, these men have done evil in all that they have done to Jeremiah the prophet, whom they have cast into the dungeon, and he is like to die for hunger in the place where he is, for there is no more bread in the city. Then the king commanded Ebed-melech, the Ethiopian, saying, Take from hence 30 men with thee, and take up Jeremiah the prophet out of the dungeon before he die. So Ebed-melech took the men with him, and went into the house of the king under the treasury, and took hence old cast clouts and old rotten rags, and let them down by cords into the dungeon to Jeremiah. Now let's take a look at this. At last the king had found the courage enough to take a stand against the princes. Or was it simply that he did not have courage enough to take a stand against his slave? Of course, his own conscience was on the slave side. And the princes were not there to object to the command. Zedekiah authorized Ebed-melech to go and set Jeremiah out of that hole, and 30 men would be enough to make sure they were not stopped. He took courage and did what he should have done in the first place, and that was stood firm with Jeremiah. Ebed-melech may be a description rather than a name. It really means king's servant. And in the case, the slave servant probably was a slave. He was an Ethiopian or a Cushite from the country south of Egypt. Male slaves in the king's house usually were eunuchs. This prevented the sexual misconduct with any of the king's numerous wives and female servants. And perhaps eunuchs were more docile and loyal than normal men. They were cut away so that they couldn't have any sexual use for their own bodies. The tribe of Benjamin lived in the area north of Jerusalem, so the gate of Benjamin probably was in the north wall of the city. A gate usually was enclosed in a large tower, which provided a convenient place for judges to hold court. Apparently the king himself sometimes took his seat there to hear the complaints of the people. The king's slave had a complaint, and he took it straight to the king. Ebed-melech's complaint was twofold. First, it was unjust and evil to put Jeremiah in the cistern. Second, he was likely to starve to death there, because there was no more bread in the city. Can hardly be taken literally. If there were absolutely no bread, Jeremiah would starve outside the cistern as quickly as he was in it. But the Babylonians had been around the town for months, so that nothing could be brought in. Food was so scarce that no one could be expected to share with the prisoner in the pit. Early, when Jeremiah had been confined to the court of the prison, the king had ordered that a daily ration should be given to him. We have to admire Ebed-melech, the Ethiopian. The foreigner realized that Jeremiah was telling the truth. The slave had more courage than the king. He took a stand against the princes who wanted him dead. Ebed-melech, he didn't lose no time in carrying out his commission, but he still took time for preparation so the rescue would be as painless as possible for the prisoner. Apparently the house of the king, like some of our houses, had a basement where discarded clothing was stored until some way was found to get rid of it. Ebed-melech and his men took some old clothes and got some ropes to lower the rags to Jeremiah in the cistern. Jeremiah was literally stuck in the mud. It would take a strong pull to get him out of it. The old clothes were for padding under the arms. To the lifting ropes would not be abrasive to his skin. So Ebed-melech the Ethiopian said unto Jeremiah, Put now these old cast clouts and rotten rags under thine armholes, under the cords. And Jeremiah did so. So they drew up Jeremiah with cords and took him up out of the dungeon. And Jeremiah remained in the court of the prison. You must understand that Jeremiah was put there for the truth. Our lesson is suffering for the truth. It's one thing to suffer for evil, But it's another thing to suffer for good. You suffer for good, God will bring you out. In Jeremiah's time, the condition of Judah went from bad to worse. Babylon subdued the nation and compelled it to pay tribute. After a futile rebellion, the king and 10,000 of his people were taken captive, while the rest were left in Judah to keep on paying tribute. Our lesson brings us to the time of another rebellion that was to be futile. Nebuchadnezzar's troops surrounded Jerusalem. People in the city were starving. Soon the Babylonians would destroy the temple and the town and take most of the people away. Why was all this happening to God's chosen people? The answer can be given in one word. One word. One three-letter word. That's power-packed. And that is sin. Most of the people of Judah were doing wrong. And behind the sin in their lives was the sin in their hearts. They did not love the Lord with all their heart and soul and might. They did not love their neighbors as themselves. They just loved themselves. And they loved money. They loved pleasure. They loved their dumb idols. So they fell into the many sins that came naturally to people with such loves. Jeremiah and Josiah was committed to the right, but most of Judah was not. It's hard to try to do anything when the majority of the people are against what you're doing. Even if you're trying to build, if you're trying to remodel, if you're trying to do something constructive, if the majority of the people are against you, you really need God. Don't care what come or what go. You got to know that God called you. Jeremiah knew that God had called him, for God had already said, I'm going to make your face like flint. I'm going to make something out of you, Jeremiah. All I want you to do is hang on in there. And I think that's what we need to do as we stand before our students tomorrow. Stand before the class. Let's take a lesson from this lesson and realize what it's saying to us. To suffer for the truth will always bring you out victorious. God always comes out a winner at the finishing line.